if you're curious, I think that is such a core part of a career. And it's curious about the thing where you're passionate. So I'm passionate about people, being curious about the thing that you're interested in and follow it up. Don't just get to that superficial level. So follow your passion, but then fully follow it. Be curious. I realised that as a senior white male, heterosexual, born in the UK, that actually, whilst I felt a bit aggrieved through some of my life that I came from a working class background and I perceived this glass ceiling, I still had some privilege.
Ben, welcome to Our Change Shift Happens. Thank you for being on.
Thanks for that.
We've got to know each other a little bit over maybe the last year, I'd say.
Yeah.
And the purpose of the podcast has probably got three real areas. It's your story, and I'm making this joke in every single one we do, but when you started at 16, 18 into the world of work, did you map out and plot a course to be where you are now within tech? And I'm waiting for someone to come on and say yes, and they haven't so far. But unpacking that story in its realist sense, the difficulties faced around transformation and technology transformation specifically, and they're how you deal with things personally, and we can talk about that. It's how you approach failure. It's how you approach people. It's how you approach business continuity. All of the different components around transformation, and then really looking at from the career that you've had and the experience that you've gained from that lens of what does the future look like and where are we going. And we've had everything from we will be the HR function for robots to I'm not really sure a lot's going to change. I think we're probably there or thereabouts. It's going to be minor tweaks, and I guess it depends on people's political views. It depends on people's interest in AI. It depends on people's experiences themselves. And I guess hopefully we provide a safe space. It's a conversation. I think we share a lot of interests around people and how to get the best out of them. And we will talk. I've no doubt we will talk about culture and all the things that you've learned along the way. But I wonder if we can maybe start by just hearing about the earlier parts of Ben's story and how you entered into the world of technology back when you did.
I'm not going to be the one that gives you the I planned all this.
Well, because this could be a 3-minute episode.
Sorry, I'm not.
I knew it was going to be me, and I'm off.
Yeah, no, that's not me. I fell into this like a lot of people, and actually my catalyst into technology transformation and change was failure. Failure.
Oh wow.
Yeah, which is quite interesting.
Yeah.
So growing up, I came from quite a working class background, and was quite fortunate. I managed to sort of pass an 11 plus exam and end up at a grammar school. So I got a really good education, which meant good grades, good GCSEs, good A levels. So your path when you're doing well academically is university.
Yeah.
I had a girlfriend at the time that I got into university. So I was due to study economics at Leicester, but Leicester at that point felt too far away from West Yorkshire to be away from my girlfriend, who was the centre of my universe. So I put myself into clearing. I went to Salford Uni and studied economics there.
Wow.
And after about 3 months, bombed out in catastrophic fashion. Because I'd not thought it through, I'd throw myself into it. The side story to that is I'm now married with 2 children to said girlfriend, so it was a good. It was worth it. But
romantic. When it works out, it's really romantic. When it doesn't, it's like, what an idiot.
I know. I mean, most people are like, oh, but yeah, it did work out. It's the right move. But when I left uni, the plan was to go back. My reflection was I've just picked the wrong uni. I've rushed into it. I've gone through clearing. I need to pick one that has got the right course for me and that's going to lead me to where I want to be. So I want to be an economist, which is funny because I'm terrible with numbers. So God knows what that'd be a good plan for. So when I got back, because I lived in Halifax, the local sort of temp work that you could get, day rate stuff, was working for Halifax Bank Scotland, HBOS.
Yeah.
So I went and did some temping there, which was just admin, data inputting stuff. Yeah, it wasn't great. But the thing that I was asked to do was basically process accounts that were in a spreadsheet. And they'd had this backlog for months. And I'm like, oh no, we can do this. And I problem solved it and cleared the backlog, which wasn't great for a number of people that I were working with because we were done then. But they went, oh, that's pretty good. Do you want a job? So I got a job answering calls, and I thought, well, that's better because it's a permanent income. It's a bit more than what I was getting, and I'm going to uni next year anyway. And my dad had worked for the same firm, so I knew one of the kind of more senior managers in the business. And I went for a coffee with him in the office, and he's like, oh, there's a job in IT. All right. And I thought, I'm not looking for a job. I'm going to uni. He goes, well, you might as well do it. It's a bit more cash to take back to uni. So ended up in IT. And probably like a lot of people, once you're in a career, you got the money, you got the stability. Why would I go back to uni and rack up debt when I've got this?
Absolutely.
So I fell into IT that way. Interestingly, I only did 18 months in pure IT.
Yeah.
The bit that I realised I loved straight off the bat was the project side of things, change. So I was never interested in cutting code. I was interested in testing and environments and all that good stuff. I don't think I had the staying power to do that. But I love change. I love the dynamism of it. I love that every day we're different. So I'm like, I want to do this change thing. So I, within a year of leaving uni, I'd gone temping, ops, IT to project manager. And then never looked back, 20 years on.
That's
20
amazing.
plus years.
I think my first foray into project management, I'd gone from being a project manager to being a portfolio director within a year. So I think we both had a very kind of, but I think when you love something, you kind of really apply yourself. And I think quite often if you're good at something, you're going to love it as well. And it's sort of, if you find your natural, something that fits your natural abilities, you're probably going to excel at it and then, catapult your career. So what skills do you think that you mastered or have innately within you that enabled you to have that trajectory?
I've got a brain that pings around like crazy constantly. I can never focus on one thought for very long. But if you're working in change, that's a little bit of a superpower, I think, because it's helpful for problem solving, joining dots, big picture stuff. So I always found that I was just naturally inclined to enjoy and be able to solve those problems. But I think the other thing that I had from an early age, and why, similar to you, I maybe rose through the ranks a bit quicker, is I've always been really good at reading people, quite people-centric, relationship-orientated. I wouldn't have called it that early in the career. It was just me being interested in folk and, making good relationships and having a way of communicating with them that would help them see different perspectives, good at negotiating. And that was quite an innate, natural ability for me. So between the problem solving and the relationship bit, that probably turbocharged that early part of the career.
You can see how it would really, definitely.
And are they skills that you've honed and refined over time?
Yeah, I think so. So I think I'd probably say there's a couple of things. So a recent boss of mine would always put me in front of the executive, in front of the sort of bigger crowds of people where we needed to tell people about the narrative of transformation, or the board members. Because he said one of my key strengths was storytelling and that ability to narrate, which can be quite powerful when you certainly when you're trying to get agreement to multi-year investments, or when you're trying to encourage large populations of colleagues to go on a journey with you. So I think that communication has honed into an ability to narrate and tell stories. I think, I was laughing at when we were setting up, Will, and sort of taking the mickey a little bit about you being a bit nerdy about your equipment, but my little kind of nerdy track that I follow at the moment is I'm kind of a bit obsessed with the human mind and neuroscience and psychology and things like that. And I think my interest in how humans operate, how they show up, why they show up that way, has been a natural progression from that early, more innate, I work well with people, I enjoy being around people, I get my energy from it, to actually trying to put a framework around some of that to help me understand it more. So I'm sure we'll talk about some of this in a bit, but one of my core beliefs and strengths that I try and bring to any role I'm in is the ability to coach and bring the potential out of people. So I think that's how it's naturally evolved into the more senior roles: storytelling, coaching, and understanding the human psyche.
Are there areas or things that you've gone out of your way to develop that maybe weren't as naturally innate. And I've got a chap that came on really recently. He's like, so I was working for a CIO, and they were like, it was in a head of architecture function. There's a head of architecture all the time. So how do I become CIO? Is my aspiration. It's like, well, yours, stop. We get it. You are great technically. Just tell me how a P&L works. How do we do procurement? I know you can fill in an RFP, but just how does procurement work? When we let those people go, as we had to, what was the mechanism for the decision? Right. Spend some time with the CFO, spend some time with the CPO, spend some time with procurement. So have you gone, I'm not saying there are examples, but have you gone and done similar things in areas where I'm naturally great with storytelling, I'm naturally good with people, I'm naturally curious. I can't go to that level, or I really struggle to engage that community unless I have.
Was it even that intentional?
Yeah.
Like initially you said that it was kind of, you solved the problem and then everybody was like, oh, this guy is really good in this role. Like, did you have that intent? And then if you did, to progress through the ranks, and if you did, what skills did you maybe have to develop?
It was probably in two parts. I never intended to rise through the ranks. I've always had the imposter syndrome about someone was going to find me out. And I think that probably comes from the background of no one in my family has followed this career path. I'm the first to build a career in the sense that we're talking about here, which is kind of in business, in those sort of director type roles, exec type roles. So I never expected it. Every time I get a new role, it's almost surprising to me. I'm like, oh, yeah, mate, somebody's going to find me out again. So it was never by design. The majority of my career has been through doing a good job, and then someone maybe coming and going, would you fancy doing this? A little bit of a tap on the shoulder or a recommendation as a role I might want to do. So that was kind of most of the career. Only recently have I put any intent around managing my career in the last couple of years. But to your point on what I've learned, Will, I'd probably say this now that I'm in a role 5 months, because I'm not going to be interviewing for a while, so hopefully no one's seen it. Actually, on that kind of control and rigor side of things, which you need from someone that's going to run transformation and tech change, that's really not my natural strength. That's a learned behavior. So the flip side of the brain pinging all over the place is I get really bored by detail. And once I've done the problem solving, the storytelling, I'm going to go on to the next idea. So I much prefer that creative side of things than I do the let's execute really well. So I think that's what I've had to lean into as not a natural strength, is to be good at this job. I also need to have a really good rigor and framework and method. Probably by chance, because I fell into a role at HBOS, which became Lloyds Banking Group. I was kind of lucky to be in a business that had a kind of best-in-class way of doing change.
So much change.
So much. Yeah. I mean, in my time there, I worked on the integration of two major banks. And then worked on divesting a bank, both of which were £2 billion programs.
Wow.
So you can't run a program like that without strong control and rigor. So that almost like the core tool set of being good at the job is the thing I've had to learn. And you know what? Every day I have to remind myself of the importance of that, because it's not natural. And I've learned to be good at it.
Yeah.
But that was the bit that I had to grow with, I think. Well,
as you've been talking, the word that keeps coming to mind is networking.
Yeah.
And I can see that the chap who your dad had sort of worked with way back when in the business, to go have a coffee, there's this job. And then throughout the course, and we do know each other, and know that you've set in place a lot of weight on relationships and building a quality network around you. Has that been a purposeful decision? Have you gone into business and right, okay, I'm going to really look for the superstars, the people who can teach me things, the people I can learn from, hopefully the people I can help as well, definitely come to the people that I can help. Has that been personal, or has it just been the natural brain pinging around, curiosity? What do you do?
It's never been purposeful. I hate the concept of networking.
Okay, right, okay.
Never done it and never will. And frankly, I wouldn't recommend people do. It can feel unnatural and uncomfortable, and you can get good at it. You can learn the skill. But no, my networking as such was actually just being interested in people. I'm just so fascinated by people, their lives, their backstories, their desires, their interests, that I don't meet people with any intent other than to get to know them. So when we met, well, it was like a colleague that we both knew had said, I think you really like Will.
Yeah.
He's really into kind of digital and he thinks differently. I'm like, oh, I want to meet this guy and pick his brains. So
and conversely said, you and Ben will really get on. He's done some amazing things that you will find interesting. You know some similar people, and I think you'll have a good out. And whatever the cafeteria thing turned, 2 hours later, we'll probably see each other again fairly soon.
100%.
That's spot on. Yeah.
I think the thing for me, right, is if you're curious, I think that is such a core part of a career. Yeah. And it's curious about the thing where you're passionate. So I'm passionate about people, and that has manifested in some great relationships and served me well. But even if you were more on the technical side of things, being curious about the thing that you're interested in, and follow it up. Don't just get to that superficial level. To achieve mastery, they say 10,000 hours, don't they? Yeah. Well, you ain't going to do that on something you're not interested in. Yeah. It's going to drain you. So follow your passion, but then fully follow it. Be curious.
Yeah. No, I was thinking about a few months ago, you made a big decision in terms of career move.
Yeah.
How did you balance weighing up that personal passion for people and the interest that you have, as you sort of spoken about toward the latter part of your career? You have maybe navigated your career now, thought about, right, okay, the directorships and the senior leadership positions in tech, and that requires thought, and I do believe it requires planning and it requires some purpose.
Yeah.
How have you balanced both of those? So what I would say, thus far, I've not had a guest who's maybe moved jobs as recently as you, where that I know that there were options for you where you've had to make those decisions. How did you balance those?
Balance the kind of human interest and the...
So I would imagine that there were a number of opportunities in front of you, some that provided more personal satisfaction in terms of what would have been interesting, maybe some that provided a better financial motive, maybe some that provided a bigger commercial challenge or opportunity. How did you balance between this is my personal passion and there's this opportunity versus I'm a technology recruiter versus this is some more money and that can absolutely sway people. This is a bigger brand that can absolutely sway people. I'm delighted that you've got the title you have, but this is a title. I've got a big group show. How did you balance those things?
So when I decided that I needed to figure out what my career should look like, it didn't start from a career place. It started from a little bit of a midlife crisis. Okay. So I started to approach 40 and start to question everything. I had my existential crisis at that point. I got tattoos, all the good stuff. I didn't get a sports car, so I didn't blow money on it. But, I kind of realised that I'd sort of overachieved on anything that you would kind of put in that tangible space, reward, title, status, the things that people often chase in the first part of the career. Yeah. And I'd not gone there with intent. So I found myself in a place where I probably had the things that materially I wanted, but I'd not chosen to go there. And I'm like, is this really what I want? Yeah. So I did a lot of soul searching and figured out, what do I want in life? What motivates me? And I thought, well, where do I get my energy? I get my energy from people. I get my energy from seeing people thrive, from getting to know them, and understanding them on a slightly deeper level than just that sort of superficial in the office, hi, how was your weekend?
Yeah.
So it had to be something that allowed me to spend time with people, to develop individuals, to develop teams. I realised that what had held me back and motivated me through my career was that working class background. I felt like I was always running away from and breaking free of social constructs and glass ceilings that are perceived to come with those things. And what I realised from that is that purpose matters.
Yeah.
Do something good.
Yeah.
I see my role as a huge privilege. It wasn't preordained for me. It wasn't my destiny. And it certainly wasn't by design. So I want to use this position for good. And I realised that because my brain pings around, I need a challenge.
Yeah.
Otherwise, I'm going to get bored. So I'm not a run type of guy.
Yeah.
I'm not a BAU type of guy. There's a place for that. I'm the one that goes in and goes, this needs fixing.
Yeah.
And we don't know where we're going to go and we don't know how to do it.
Yeah.
How are we going to do it? So figuring out those three things, I kind of had this rule of thumb now, which is, I'm not that bothered about financial reward. I could probably earn a fair bit more with more title. In fact, I turned down a chief role on an exec board to be a director in the organisation I'm in. And the reason was purpose. So I work for the Medical Protection Society. They have a truly societal impact. They allow doctors and dentists to practice. Yeah. And that's, critical to a society.
Pillars of society.
Absolutely.
The healthcare system is,
That's it. It's a business that had not invested very much over the last decade. No. So we're starting from a quite far back place. So there's a lot of challenge in there.
Yeah.
And it was a chance to build a function from scratch, which brought in all of that nurturing the people. So it seemed like an obvious choice, Will, once I'd done that.
Yeah.
So, one of the things that we talked about in the build-up to this was, what do I wish I could go back and tell myself when I was 18, 19, 20? And I think I would tell myself, and I'd tell anyone else that's starting out in a career, figure out where you get your energy and figure out what matters to you on a more deeper level, what matters to you in here. When do you feel good about yourself? Yeah. And if you can suss that out, you can build a career path that's based on that. And I think if you're enjoying things and you're getting that fulfillment and your energy is natural, you probably will thrive because you're going to show up your best.
Yeah. You talked about imposter syndrome and you talked about, it's quite interesting to me, and I'd really like to spend a tiny bit of time there because it's not often that you hear imposter syndrome being a male thing. But also you don't hear a lot of men going, I have it because, bravado. And it's really refreshing to hear you say that. Equally, it seems like you've had this transformative time, which you termed as a midlife crisis, but I think it's just a personal transformation, right?
Yeah.
I think maybe you were operating from that higher position on the Maslow's hierarchy of needs where you were self-actualizing.
Yeah.
So, like, in that transformation, you decided, I'm going to break through the glass ceiling. And looking back on the time feeling like an imposter and feeling like there were these glass ceilings, do you think that was perceived, or do you think that those things were actually in place? And how does your perception of how you felt at the time, how do you reflect on the perception now? And what would you say to anybody going through kind of the same feelings as you did back then?
I'll do a slight sidebar in helping answer that. So when I talked about purpose, the last 3 or 4 years at YBS, when I was a member of the senior leadership team, I wanted to do something with that position.
Yeah.
Business transformations are what I get paid to do, but they come and go.
Yeah.
Someone's succeeded me in that role now and we'll do it different and she'll do a fabulous job. For it to be purposeful, it is that human level. So I chose to follow one of my other passions, which is diversity, inclusion, equity. And I think if you think about imposter syndrome, I hear what you're saying about the needs of a woman going through that, where it is much more common. And I think you would put in there all of the kind of different types of protected characteristics, ethnicity, sexuality. So I think it was going on that D&I journey that helped me to see that I had a version of imposter syndrome.
Yeah. Okay.
So I realized that as a senior white male, heterosexual, born in the UK, that actually, whilst I felt a bit aggrieved through some of my life that I came from a working class background and I perceived this glass ceiling, I still had some privilege.
Yeah. Okay.
So understanding that I had some privilege helped me understand, A, yes, I did have imposter syndrome that came from social status, but B, that allowed me to empathise with other people.
Yeah.
So I'm really passionate about allyship.
Okay. Yeah.
Because, look, I think it gives me purpose. It gives, like I said, I think it's really important in society that we all try and lean into that to make society better. I've got kids. One of them's a daughter.
Yeah.
I want the world to be better for her when she comes up. So there's all kinds of reasons that motivate you. So I've taken a bit of a sidebar because one of the questions you asked me is, do I think there is a glass ceiling?
Well, do you think that there was at the time, or was that just your perception of it?
I think both statements are true.
Yeah.
So what imposter syndrome is really is the perception that something could hold you back and that you're not capable, or that's not for you, it's for somebody else. Yeah. So I think it's what I perceived as much as what it was. But I've certainly had interactions. I've been in the room where I would be the only person that isn't Oxbridge educated, for example.
Yeah.
And you feel it.
Yeah.
You know, my imposter syndrome was twofold. It's about being found out.
Yeah.
And it was about perceived intellectual superiority of people that had the qualification.
Right.
And I felt inferior, and therefore I wouldn't want to speak up.
Yeah.
And it was that journey on understanding privilege, what privilege I had and what I didn't, that helped me do it and go on that journey. The honest answer is that glass ceiling was far less of a real thing for me than it is for other people, for a woman, for a person of colour.
That's interesting.
So I do think it exists. I still think we have societal frameworks and structures that hold people back.
Yeah.
And it's there, it's real. Whether it's how you live it or whether it's actually there in the business, it is real. But I think it's only going to get better through people that do achieve those roles in the more senior world to actually be, again, curious about, well, how do I experience that room? But how might someone else that has even less privilege? I've never walked into the room and been the only white man.
Right.
But I work with a lot of fantastic people that might have been the only woman in the room, or might have been the only person from an ethnic background in the room, or the only person who, you know, is not heterosexual in a room. I think it's real for me, but it's more real for others. And I try and use that to be a better ally.
Yeah, I absolutely love that answer. I have my own imposter syndrome story. I was asked to go to this conference by an employer, and I ran out crying because I felt like an imposter at the imposter syndrome conference. It was like, you know, now I tell it as a bit of an anecdote. But I too felt, you know, like I was going to be found out. But looking back on it now, I think I was the one holding myself back. Actually, you know, my message to other people would be go for it. Right?
Yeah.
Just forget it. Just do the thing that you love, find your purpose, and, you know, just like go for it. And I love the fact that you're sharing that you have also felt like that. Because I think it's important for everybody to know that imposter syndrome or that glass ceiling isn't actually only for whether, you know, whether you're a woman or whether people, you know, people across every single gender, religious, you know, national background. Like, people do have those common feelings, but there is success at the end of it. So I really like that you shared that story. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thinking about culture and where we've just come from in the conversation around people and inclusion. We're in Leeds. You've driven one of the biggest transformations that the city has seen, particularly in financial services. But I think it's well known the transformation journey that YBS went on. And we had a coffee before this, and I'm not going to burst the or tell the story ahead of you, but the output of that from a commercial perspective was phenomenal.
Yeah,
but it can't have been without its challenges.
Yeah.
How did you approach the program from being asked to design it, being asked to take it on? I know at times put it on your back and drive it through. And how did you approach it from a people perspective? And as the team grew and matured and there was size and scale, how do you keep, or I guess, what was the culture like, and how would you describe it? And what was the Ben Sampson levers that were being pulled to drive what was a very, very well-regarded, well-headlined, well-renowned transformation in an organization that, as we spoke, it has regulation, it has reporting, it has a membership base where you have to be sensitive to the money that you're spending. In the framework of all of that, how did you approach that at the beginning? What did that journey look like?
If I said I had a grand plan when we started it that worked, I'd be lying. I think it was the bit that I learned the most on that transformation journey is how do you do the cultural side of things? And it's probably the thing that I'm bringing most into the current role, actually, is those learnings. But if I go back to some of the principles that I think helped, the first thing is often one of the simple mistakes people make in transformation is think it's about technology investment. Technology is a tool that enables people to do things.
Yeah. So
it's not that it's not essential, but it is the tool for the person. So I think you have to make sure when you're designing a transformation, you've got just as important a lens on people, their skills, their values, their beliefs, their confidence is really, really important. So
Yeah.
design that too. And just as you would if you were trying to move to a new technology platform, you're going to do as is and to be.
Yeah.
You have to do that with people too. How are we today? What are our strengths as an organization? What's unique about us? What do we want to improve? So that's the first thing. Be thoughtful about it, be mindful about it. I think the second thing is, I've talked about interest in humans, curiosity, the human psyche. That works in smaller teams. Once you make that organization wide and you've got 4,000 or 5,000 people and upwards that you need to take on a journey, you can't go and get to know them all individually. So one of the big learnings how do we do this on a grander scale? And that's where I start to learn through that journey. So I think a few tips I'd give on it, things that I learned and then found worked, were you have to lead in the way that you want other people to follow. So if you want to lead with curiosity, because that's what you want others to have, you have to be curious all the time. If you want a culture of innovation, you have to be seen to do something yourself that's different, and B, accept that you're going to get things wrong and signal failure, because creativity needs psychological safety. So I think it's important that you demonstrate that you're on that journey with them.
Yeah.
I think the more vulnerable you can be as a leader, I'm sure lots of leaders have talked to you about vulnerability, but I think it is really important, because when you think about glass ceilings and you think about people's imposter syndrome and fears, through the structures that we create in businesses, the senior teams don't often feel human. They become a figurehead, they become a decision maker, they become a soundbite.
Yeah.
So the more that you can make yourself human and vulnerable, the more likely they are to go on that journey with you. I think the other thing that works quite well is, we were talking on the way up about values and behaviours are not something that you decorate on a wall. That's the mistake that a lot make. We were laughing that my lanyard has the values on it. And that's not enough. I think if you find that authentic version of what does that look like, I think you can send cultural signals.
Yeah.
So a couple of examples. One would be from an old boss of mine, Stephen White. And I've pinched this, I use it. And he says that his mum used to say to him, you've got 2 ears and 1 mouth for a reason.
Yeah.
Listen twice as much as you talk. Now, that's a really lovely soundbite, because what you're saying is, A, be curious, and B, have some empathy.
Yeah.
Yeah. If you listen, you understand. If you understand, you can act.
Yeah.
And I think that's really powerful, because change creates fear, and you can't overcome fear by just going, it'll be fine.
Yeah.
You can't overcome fear by going, look how brilliant it's going to be. That's not how a change curve happens for a human. But if you listen and you understand the fear, you can act on that. So that's a really so we used to talk about 2 ears and 1 mouth a lot, because
within the team.
Yeah, and across the business.
Yeah.
Because it's a cultural signal, and it's easy to remember.
Yeah.
So there's things like that that can really work. There's one that we're using at the moment, MPS, which has its origins, I think, in Olympic rowing.
Okay.
So I think the British Olympic rowing team had a bit of a barren spell. They're traditionally a successful medal-winning team. And then when they had this barren spell, they tried to change the culture. It'd become oppressive. And they had this concept of back or build. And I really like that. So it's similar to the Jeff Bezos disagree and commit kind of method, but I think it's got a little bit more of a positive spin, which is that another facet of transformation is about moving forward.
Yeah.
It's not about always looking behind. If you can learn from the past, you learn from the past, but you don't carry it. You leave it behind you.
Okay.
And what back or build says is, right, so here's a thing we're going to do. And you've got 2 options when you engage with that. This is to colleague populations, to teams. If you think it's a good idea, then back it, get behind it, follow us with it, help us achieve it. If you think it can be better, build on it. So you go, I really like that, and it could be better if.
Yeah. ...
So I think for culture change, if it was to summarize it, you've got to live it yourself. I think you've got to understand that it's about people, and therefore You've got to understand the human psyche, and that's where those cultural signals come in, which is how are we going to signal the culture we want in a way that is easily remembered.
Yeah.
How would you deal with people whose response, instead of back or build, is kill and destroy? Like, have you ever faced that before, and how did you deal with it?
I think we all face that a little bit, don't we? But this is where, again, I think empathy and being human is what makes a difference. There are very, very few people who genuinely come to work to be disruptive.
Yeah.
I would agree with that.
If you find someone in work who is disruptive, that's coming from somewhere.
Yeah.
And often it's coming from fear.
Yeah.
So if you take the back or build in isolation, it's not necessarily going to tackle all the problems. But if you combined it with 2 ears and 1 mouth, you could.
Yeah.
Let me understand why you feel that way. Let me hear your perspective. I often find sometimes just listening to someone is all they want.
Yeah.
They're not asking for you to change your direction. They just want to be heard.
To be heard. Yeah.
So that's usually my approach to when you've got people that, for whatever reason, are being disruptive, is I try and show a bit of kindness. We have to create high performance cultures, but I don't believe in stick.
Right. Okay.
I don't actually believe in carrot either. I think it's just a little bit too old fashioned and too binary. What I believe in is, if you understand where people are coming from, what's motivating them, what's creating fear, you've got a chance to overcome it.
Yeah. And in sort of, a transformation path, pace is often quite a key pillar of delivering transformation well. How would you do that quickly? If you have to deliver really quickly, but you're struggling, and can that be done really quickly, or is it something that needs to take time?
I mean, ideally it's going to take time in it, because again, you're talking about a change curve, and people go on the change curve at different paces. Some people can process very quickly. Some people it takes a long time. I think, look, our job's to achieve outcomes. Sometimes what you need to do if someone's struggling and they're critical to it is find a way to take them out of that initial firing line so that they can process and get someone in who's ready to do it. As much as I'm a people-oriented person, that you still need to achieve a level of performance in your teams.
Yeah.
So it's really important to build teams that are ready to achieve those goals. I think then what you have to do is you have to make sure that you don't leave those people behind.
Yeah.
You find a way to let them go on that journey, and then you reintegrate them.
Yeah.
Or you might help them find something that is a better fit for them.
Yeah.
I think one of the things that I struggled with earlier in my career was, if you see people that are struggling and not performing, it wasn't that I didn't want to have a conversation, but I'd see the human and I'd feel guilt.
Yeah.
And I think you're probably not human if you don't find those conversations difficult. But I've actually realised that doing it with dignity, having a conversation with someone, is probably more helpful to them.
Yeah.
Because often if they're showing up that way, they're really struggling.
Yeah.
And it might be that the role's not right for them. It might be that it's not a fit with their purpose. Again, lots of people who I've seen leave roles for whatever reason, they end up thriving.
Yeah.
They were just in the wrong role.
Yeah,
So
I really agree with you there. I think it's kind of this question came up at a transformation breakfast that I was at, and the consensus is they tend to kind of steer away from this subject, but the sooner you deal with the kind of that issue, the better it is for everyone. It's like it doesn't have to be this taboo subject. It doesn't have to be this kind of like, you've got to leave because you're not good enough. More often than not, they're just not in the right place at the right time, or they were right for the company before the change happened, and all of a sudden the culture's changing and they're just not willing to go on the journey. So I think that's really well put, actually.
That's something dealing with people with respect.
Mm-hmm.
How would you want to be dealt with? How would you, I'd absolutely agree. I don't think anyone 99.9% of people don't go to work to do a bad job. 99% of people don't go to work to be actively disruptive. Their behaviour may cause that effect. And they certainly don't come to work to be rude or abrasive. It's a tiny, tiny minority. What I do love is that just taking someone aside and just listen to them. And it's a similar kind of thought, but it rang true to me. So there's a owner of a consultancy in Leeds, and they're probably 50, 60 people. So every time someone left, and with 50, 60 people, so people are going to come and leave, I'm not going to say he hated them. No, well, he said, I just couldn't speak. It was just, and he said, a couple of years ago, I learned how difficult, because it's this one chap, right? How difficult must it have been for that person? They were moving on there was nothing that we did. And so as soon as someone had been brave enough to come and say, so-and-so, I'm moving on, and this is why. And he said, no one came and said it's because of you. Maybe the project's come to an end, or maybe you got a better opportunity or somewhere to grow and learn, or they were moved. So how brave have you been? Because the emotion that he said, I feed into that business. It's me. Everyone knows it. And by creating that space for people to not be scared and to be heard, it's not improved our retention because it wasn't bad in the first place. But what we have done is not had this moment or this window where this person who was leaving, there was then a ripple effect around because they weren't being disruptive. They weren't being abrasive. They would just find something better or that paid a bit more, that would give them better exposure or move them to an area that we couldn't. And all I had to do was go, wow, good for you. What's that? Wow, good for you. 4 words. He said it just completely changed. And actually, we noticed when you look back in hindsight, what you'd see was we had moments on projects where there was disruption and there was performance downput. And we built some pretty cool teams, some pretty cool businesses.
Yeah.
And there were moments where you go, why is the velocity not as high as it could be? Why is the output? And said invariably it was someone was moving on. Just going, wow, good for you. Tell me about it. Love to hear about it.
Yeah.
Wow, that's awesome. So, they said everyone just relax and go, oh, you're really happy for me. Said I might have gone home on a Friday and been like, oh, we're never going to replace Lucy. But they said that's my problem. But Lucy's got something better, and I'm genuinely happy for her.
Yeah.
I think the foresight and let me finish that bit. It's got to be authentic.
Yeah. He
genuinely felt happy for them. So I had all these other problems. They were leaving a project. We're a consultancy. We delivered to a client. I may not be able to, but all of those problems, and I didn't shy away from those. It's like, right, we have to replace. We have to find. Wow, Lucy, you go and have something cool. That sounds great. Or I know someone there, pretty well connected. You've got a good one. There's a way to do it that I think is brilliant.
Yeah.
So conversely then, so identifying talent and building to that performance aspect, how do you balance delivery and performance whilst maintaining culture?
It's always tough, isn't it? And sometimes you don't get to culture overnight. So sometimes you will have a period where it feels a bit turbulent.
Yeah.
Because you're trying to get to that performance level, and that will see your culture normalizing, aligning itself. How do you do it? So I think my philosophy, I'm going to go back to the human side of things, right? So another reason why I think people might struggle and you're not getting performance is that they're not set up to win.
Okay.
So I talk about setting up to win a lot with my own teams.
Okay.
How do we set you up to win? Often people in senior roles, particularly when they come into a new team, they've been brought in with a mandate: deliver more, deliver faster, deliver better, increase the value. And that's fine. That's what we get paid to do. Yeah. The easy thing to do there is to tear up the team and bring in people that you know can perform. That gets an outcome, but I'd argue that that's a bit lazy.
Yeah.
And I'd also argue that you're missing out on a level of performance that can come from people that you've taken on a journey. So if you can set someone up to win that hasn't for a while, it could be that people haven't shown some belief in them. They've got imposter syndrome. It could be that the processes around them not lent themselves to being able to do a good job. Could be that no one's bothered to understand them as an individual. They might have a level of they're introvert, or there's a level of neurodiversity there, which means that unless you find a way to make adjustments and give them a chance to thrive, they're not, because what's a societal norm is different for them. So there's all kinds of different reasons why sometimes people wouldn't thrive. So I think when I think about high performance, I try and look at the whole. So when I'm designing transformation, I talk about people, process, and technology. When I'm trying to achieve high performance, I'm looking at people, process, and technology.
Yeah.
So it's the same method. So if someone's not performing, is it the people? Is it the process? Is it the technology? And if you can try and get under that, I just think you get a momentum.
Yeah.
So you show a bit of belief in people, that can create, they call it fellowship, don't they, in leadership, you know, that can create a team that want to go that extra mile. Oh, wow, you've cleared the path for me to be able to do a better job. You provide me with a bit of support and air cover. You've said you believe in me. One of my team the other day said, as the first person to say to her, you're fabulous, in 3 years.
Oh my God.
So it would have been really easy to go, I've got someone that can do your job, and then they've proven to me. But I think this individual will do a brilliant job. And something as simple as showing a bit of belief means that hopefully she'll go and thrive now because she's uber talented. Yeah. And all it needed was a bit of belief and setting them up. So that's what I'd say, Will, is set people up for success. And then if they don't perform, then you get to that point about going, maybe this isn't the right fit for you. Maybe there's a different role that works better for you, a different environment that works better for you. But I think you have to put the hard yards in up front to create that environment. And I think that builds a culture because lots will follow that then. This guy's not here to, you know, bring in the hatchet. He's here to try and achieve some good stuff, and he wants to take us on that journey. And that's a higher level of performance than you can get from just bringing in your own people.
And I guess when you've been thinking about you as the people in that analogy, have you seen other great leaders do that well? And I guess equally, have you seen people who've maybe got it wrong and seen the consequences, so you understand the value of, oh, wow, I've been a part of the chief exec who's thought about these three things and seen it work really well?
Yeah, I have. I've seen it work well on a few occasions, and I've seen it work really badly.
Yeah.
Where I've seen it work badly was more in the early parts of my career at Lloyds Banking Groups. I think in the bigger corporate, very commercial structures, performance is the driver.
Yeah.
So they don't have as much remit and bandwidth to give it a little bit of time.
Yeah.
And I certainly saw some really poor behaviours there where people were almost trying to create armies of like-minded people, mini-me's. You know, I'll build a team in my own image type thing. And that's where I've seen the worst leadership. You know, you don't talk like me, you don't show up like me, you don't look like me.
Yeah.
Those lazy, again, stereotypes can hold you back. Where I've seen it done brilliant, I'm going to talk about two people that I thought did it brilliantly in different ways that I've taken a lot from and I try and emulate. And I knew in the last decade, actually.
Okay.
So two bosses that I had at Yorkshire Building Society. So the first is a guy called Paul Howley. He's the CTO at Nottingham Building Society now.
Okay.
And I am giving him a shout out. So Paul is an incredibly intelligent, thoughtful man. And he's an incredibly kind man as well. And I think he would probably admit himself that he's naturally quite introverted. What I thought Paul did brilliantly is he achieved high performance in his own career, but remained authentic.
Okay.
He didn't put on an extroverted facade. He didn't try and be the big bad CTO. I'm going to get high performance out of driving you lot hard.
Yeah.
He was the one that maybe showed me that you could be quite senior and believe in people. And I think because he naturally built a career around being a little bit more observant and thoughtful about where he would contribute to a conversation, because that was his natural preference. He also realized that he could allow others to thrive and take some of that space for him. So what I saw in Paul and what I learned was build a team that's not in your own image, build a team that can complement what you bring.
Yeah.
And what I also saw in Paul is it's okay to be you.
Yeah.
You can still achieve. So I thought that was lovely. And then the other one I talked about earlier, which is Stephen White. So he was the Chief Operating Officer at YBS. He's now the Chief Operating Officer at Santander UK. And what I loved about Stephen is he just saw talent and then he would back it.
Yeah.
And he would believe in talented people. Stephen was the one that gave me my first director role. And I don't think I am the cookie cutter director. I'm still talk quite Yorkshire. I'm dressed a bit smarter today, but just as likely to be in a t-shirt. But he saw that I could bring something to the team, and he backed me completely. And the other thing I saw in Stephen that I thought was just brilliant leadership and created high performance was just the human side of him.
Yeah.
He was kind and he was friendly and he would always talk. You know, when you get to that level, you're busy. But if someone went up and said hello to him, he'd say hello and ask him about the family. And the thing that I saw about Stephen, again, it's about authenticity, I think. If you talk to him about your family, you've got 2 kids, Stephen, yeah, I've been on holiday with them. A month later, he'd ask you how your kids were.
Oh, remember.
He'd remember. And again, I think he showed me that there's no matter how busy or how senior you get, there's a power in creating a culture where you keep that human interest. I can't imagine how many people would go up to him and talk to him, but you always found a way to remember. So those 2 for me were just wonderful examples of what I would aspire to be as a leader, and I am still aspiring to be. And I think the commonality in that is authenticity and being human.
I couldn't agree with you more. So Matt, who you know and is involved here and was my boss for many years, when I eventually started to report to him, there was some stuff that you said that really sat with me, that some stuff you adopt, some stuff you still emulate. So I go and say, I can get this right, because I do know there were 14 officers across the east. So I go into it and you hear all these comments, and then I know I could go and get involved in that. They said it took me so long to realize, just go and sit down and let it all happen, because you have no idea the context. You probably drop into X part of the UK once every few weeks, a bit further away from where you live once every 2 months, some places around the world once a year. So going and dropping and being involved in this conversation, there's absolutely no point. But he knew everyone's personal situation.
Yeah.
Everyone's. And it was almost scary, because there were people who joined who you convinced he'd never met, but he knew that they were in a student house, or that they just moved into London and they were absolutely like, how's your first year going in London, or what football team they supported, or what hockey team. It was almost scary. And I've since gone to become really good mates with him. And there's we shared the same coach for a long time, or he had this for a long time then they were involved and I took over. There's like presenteeism is one of Matt's greatest strengths, because there could be, so it was a PLC, it's like there could be a shareholder on the phone and he would be there for them, and then turn around and have a conversation with the guy who goes after 18 months, and there would be no difference in how he was. The level of detail and the conversation and his switched onedness would not be different, and he'd be completely present in both, but he would be present in both. But he's also had a beautiful way, give me 2 minutes, and finish that bit with X person, and they'd be absolutely involved in your conversation. It's beautiful. And then the second thing was he was very vulnerable himself. And I've gone on to know him, as a friend, but even, I said this a little while ago, I think one of the things that I observed that was most powerful when there were a couple of thousand people is the stories that were told about. 2,500 people can't know him. It's impossible. But you can invariably, over the time, spent a lot of time in lots of the other offices, you go and they all felt like they knew him. And they all felt like they knew his family. They felt like they knew his kids. They felt like they knew he's big. We played professional. Like they knew what team he played for way back when. It's Plymouth Argyle, and everyone made a joke of it saying they're afraid to. And it was just this human to human relationship. And he took that business from, when did he join? 3 offices to 40 odd around the world, a couple of billion quid turnover, and it was all done by a person who you could totally relate to.
Yeah.
And you totally knew and you trusted. And I think we were put in a position in COVID where very difficult decisions and conversation, and you were like, it's okay. There's a calmness. There's a real, it's going to be okay. Just be yourself and we'll get through it. And it's incredible.
When you hear stories about people like that, it's the genuine interest in others, isn't it? And it made me think about something else that I think I've learned more over the last 4 or 5 years is when you're working your way through a career, you're often rewarded for delivering something well, getting through a lot of work, getting stuff done. So you're rewarded for output, for effort almost. And it's quite interesting as you transition into leadership, you carry that for a bit, don't you?
Yeah, you do. It's difficult to let go of.
Yeah, I had 10 tasks to do before. Now I've got 100.
Yeah.
No, you haven't. You've lost it. And I think what you kind of see is that whatever is authentic and normal to you, if you are very interested in people and you want to know their story about their kids, or if you're quite introvert and thoughtful, but you want to encourage people to, it doesn't matter. The common thread is personal heroics don't get you anywhere.
Yeah.
It stops being about you.
Yeah.
And when you talk about DE&I, diversity of thought really matters. Like one person's brain, unless maybe you're Einstein or Shakespeare or something that's just truly unique, it's never going to be as powerful as 10 people's brains or 50 people's brains. So one of the big things that I wish I could have told myself sooner as I start to get to the more senior roles is it's about the people that are around you thriving. It's about the team succeeding. And that's why I don't think it's about how I show up as a leader is authentic to me. That might be different for someone else. It was different for Paul. It was different for Stephen. It was different for the chap that you're talking about. But the common thread, I think, in where that's worked, and we're all telling these stories about people, is they've all found a way to allow those around them to thrive.
Yeah, I would agree. Do you think vulnerability is the same then, that it's very specific to an individual? Because we talk about being vulnerable as a leader. What does that actually mean? What does it actually mean?
For me, I think vulnerability is about finding a way to break down social barriers and build trust.
Yeah. Build trust.
That's what vulnerability means to me. And that will mean something different to each individual, and it will mean something different for different interactions. So vulnerability can be something as small as a shared hobby, and you discover that about each other, and it gives you something to talk about and break the ice, and you can create some trust through it. It could be that you share something about your life, your family situation, or how you like to go out for meals, what you like to eat. Find that common ground. Vulnerability can also be something bigger if you feel that that's what you want to do. So a couple of years ago now, I had an episode where I struggled with my mental health. I suffered from anxiety. I suffered from depression. And there's a social stigma about talking about those things. It's difficult. It's difficult for everybody, but it's difficult for a man to talk about those things. I've talked about that in work, and I'm talking about it on a podcast now. That's a deep level of vulnerability to share. However, in sharing that, I hope again that if I go back to that purpose of I've been fortunate and I want to pay it back.
Yeah.
And if in saying I'm a man, I'm 6'4", I used to play rugby, and I struggled with mental health, and I needed a little bit of time out, and I needed a bit of help to get better.
Yeah.
And that's okay. It's not stopped my career. I'm still thriving. That's a vulnerability that I'm comfortable to share. That has helped me build some really, really strong bonds and relationships in sharing that. And interestingly, it's allowed people within my teams to, in their own way, come and reach out and say, I've struggled with that too.
I'm struggling at the moment.
And I'm struggling now.
Yeah, I'm struggling.
How have you managed to still be in this career and do that? So I think it can mean anything on that spectrum. I think that it's back to that authenticity. I'm happy to talk about that. Someone else might have had the same experience and they're not. But that's okay, because it's authentic to you. So anything that makes it human, builds trust, is vulnerability.
Yeah. So earlier, I really liked that you mentioned psychological safety.
Yeah.
In kind of any change curve, there's going to be, like you said, lots of change, and some people might not necessarily be ready or willing to go on that change curve or journey. But one of the things that I think through having these conversations around transformation is kind of what's coming through is this idea that psychological safety is super important. How do you create psychological safety in your teams?
Yeah, I mean, again, it's something that I've been working on and refining and continue to whilst I continue to work, I imagine, because it's and again, it's understanding different people. But the things that I've learned.
Could you also just define it for us, what it means for you as well?
So psychological safety for me is the ability to be as close to your natural and authentic self as possible in work. This is psychological safety in work. There are different definitions of it in friendships and relationships. But for me, it's about feeling like you can show up as you. That's how I define psychological safety.
Okay.
And how I try and create it is, first of all, I'm very honest and very direct. You know where you stand with me. I'm never rude, but I will always speak my truth. I will always share good and bad, how I'm seeing the world, how I'm seeing performance, how I'm seeing people. So I think if people know that you're going to be honest, they're not second guessing, are you telling the truth when you're giving any particular message. The second thing that I think is really important is consistency.
Okay.
If you're inconsistent in what you expect, in how you show up, people will not feel psychologically safe.
Yeah.
I've worked for an individual in the past who was very inconsistent emotionally. They could be the best person you've ever worked with on a good day, but if they were having a bad day, you felt that. And I found that really difficult to build psychological safety because I never knew what I was going to get. So that consistency of how you show up, which does include you can have bad days, but signpost you're having a bad day. Do you know what I mean? It's like, it's human to do that, but you're consistent in being honest about it. I think the third thing is that you have to encourage failure. Failure is okay. I'm never, ever going to tell someone that I'm disappointed in them for making a mistake, for failing on a project, for failing on an activity, for not solving a problem in the way that I thought they could. What I would always ask is, what have you learned from me and what will you do differently next time? And I think fear of failure is a barrier to psychological safety as well. So if you can do your best to remove that, I think that's really important. And then the last thing I'd say is we spend most of our lives in work. To just find a way to just have a little bit of fun as well. Just, enjoy working with people. That's how I try and create psychological safety.
On the subject of failure, so, I think we talked earlier about sound bites. Failure is just, you learn just as much from failure as you do from success, all of that stuff. That's all well and good. But how do you manage failure in a corporate environment in a positive way, right? Because, sometimes the results are just binary. You either delivered or you haven't, How do you manage that in the context, get the importance of managing a person through failure, but how do you manage a corporation through a failure?
I mean, I'm experiencing a little bit of that at the moment. Look, I think the trick is, and this is again a principle on slightly more on the technical side, how I try and design transformations with my team is I try and chunk things up into small parts because, the concept of failing fast, I'd build on it a little bit and go fail small.
Okay, yeah.
Because if you fail small and you've learned from it, those small failures don't become big failures. And occasionally you can't help it, but often a big failure, a project that overruns by months, a project that doesn't deliver benefits, it fails, a team that completely disengaged from the thing that you're trying to do, it's not one failure, it's a multiple of small failures. So how you manage it, I think, again, I would just be transparent and authentic and I'd own it. I think you should always, always be honest in your communications, particularly in reporting change. You start to try and zhuzh it up a little bit, you're going to come a cropper. But yeah, so try and design it to have, if you're going to fail quickly and on a small scale, then you learn from that. And then those smaller failures don't build up to a bigger one is how I think you do it. But that also means, I think that's why it's linked to psychological safety, because the other reason why lots of small failures become a big failure is that people don't feel comfortable enough to tell you that they've had the small failure. And society in the UK doesn't value failure, does it? You should avoid it at all costs. But my daughter, when she was in reception, her reception teacher had this really lovely way of looking, going, we all know what fail is, don't we? First attempt in learning.
Oh, yes, I've heard that.
I loved that.
I've not heard that.
Yeah, I loved it.
Yeah.
So, So yeah, it's really lovely. First attempt in learning. So
Thank you.
yeah, look, all of these things link together, don't they? They become self-fulfilling. But yeah, look, failure on a grand scale is never comfortable. It's hard. You know you're going to get a rough ride with it. You know that you're going to be in the trenches. That's when the long hours kick in. And we've all been there as well. You know, if you work in change, you will have those moments. It is part of the roles that we do. If it was easy, we wouldn't have a career.
Yeah, exactly. And I think it's also knowing that, you know, you're not the first to fail.
No.
You certainly won't be the last. You know, if a project has gone red or over budget, well, we need to address that immediately.
Yep.
So put your hand up. You know, and we'll sort it. Like, nothing is completely unsolvable as long as you catch it in time, I guess.
I agree.
So looking forward, Ben, I guess there's two parts to this. What do you see as the most exciting or the thing that we could capitalize on most on the horizon? And the advice that you would give to yourself, how would you, if you were a bit earlier in your career, how would you future-proof, or what steps would you take to ready yourself for that?
I suppose you probably expect me to talk about AI, wouldn't you, right?
Yeah, I'll be honest, we've sat here and I could probably...
Yeah, I'm not going to talk about AI.
Yeah.
Sorry, I don't.
Great. We are going to become the HR department for robots, was your personal favourite.
Nice.
Yeah.
Nice. So here's the thing that excites me the most about the potential of the future is I think the good side of the connectedness of the world these days is that I think we're becoming more aware of the importance of societal impacts of the environment, of DE&I, these kind of things, and what they are, and what I'm seeing in the next generation of people that are joining the workforce is much more open-mindedness, much more interest in other humans, much more interest in not just doing the thing right, doing the right thing.
Yeah.
You know, I talked about purpose in picking a role. I think that's becoming more and more common. So the thing that I think we will hopefully see in the future is an increased focus on change and technology for good, in the climate sense, for good in the societal sense. I did some work with Microsoft while I was at YBS around using the scale, the brand, the depth of budgets that Microsoft could do, but the fact that they do try and do philanthropical things.
Yeah.
And we set up a scheme in Leeds in the more socially deprived areas, whereby kids that are in school that probably don't expect to have any kind of career, let alone a career in technology, would be given free taster sessions on what it's like to work in tech. And those that showed an interest and an aptitude would be given free boot camps, 12-week courses on cloud engineering, on power apps, things like that. So it was very Microsoft orientated. And then again, as that filters down, those that really follow through on that interest, we'd worked with a number of firms in Leeds to tee up apprenticeship levies to offer employment. And we addressed some of the social challenges with that, like we provided laptops, we provided dongles and things so that they could actually lean into it. I think that's a really wonderful example of a firm like Microsoft doing something good on a societal impact, because those people probably didn't believe that they could do it, and you give them that belief. So that's what I hope we see more of, is that as we can use that technology to free up time, which is where maybe AI comes in potentially, that we start to use it for good. So that's what I hope.
Okay.
To answer your second question about how I would go back and prepare myself for it, I'm going to go back to something that I said at the start. Find out what you're passionate about, find out what gives you energy, and make that the path that you follow. And as you follow it, just be really curious.
Yeah.
Go on a lifelong learning journey. And actually, it doesn't matter how the world of work changes then. If you're curious, Facebook used to call it neuroplasticity. It was one of the 3 things they recruited for. And it basically means that you can context switch, you can task switch.
Okay.
If I'm a good problem solver, I could make a good engineer on any code. I could make a good tester if I've got rigor and I like to break things, type thing. So I think that's the neuroscience word for it. But yeah, just be curious, and then as the world evolves, you'll go with it.
Yeah. Have a flexible mindset.
Yeah.
So I think actually, in a changed environment, a flexible mindset is a must, right? If you have a fixed mindset, you're probably best off with a more logical, I don't want to say deductive, I don't think that's the right word, but it's more, a fixed mindset is more suited to a routine rather than a changeable environment, if that makes sense. So I think flexible mindset is probably the right word.
I think you're right. I just had another thought. I touched a little bit on mental health and well-being. I just want to sort of qualify why I keep talking about finding something that you enjoy and that gives you energy. I'm into my 40s now, so I'm sort of halfway through a career. The hardest thing to manage now is the fact that this is a marathon, not a sprint. Like it can wear you down, can't it? Do you know what I mean?
Yes, I do. Yes.
So whether that's 3 a.m.s getting up to go to Putin's Barcelona, but I think the biggest advice I could give to someone that's starting out on a career is it's a long time working. If you're not enjoying it and it's not giving you energy, you're going to burn out before you get to the end of it.
I think I definitely burnt out 3 or 4 times before I realized, your energy supply is not an endless source. So it's kind of, it will run out. So learning to manage that is in an environment that you like is kind of a priority. I think that's great. I don't think we touched on it. I think you expected Ben to go through the details of the transformation, and I don't think we managed to quite get there. So I'll put the question in this way: what is kind of a transformation that you're most proud of that you've either undertaken or led?
It's interesting you ask it, because I think I sort of said this a bit earlier. I'm never actually proud of the transformations.
No.
They're really good for signposting that you've achieved something, and that's good for your career.
Yeah.
Okay. So I could give you the soundbite version of all the amazing stuff we achieved at Yorkshire Building Society.
Yes, please.
So I'll do that. But then I'm going to, if it's all right, answer what I'm most proud about.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. So the story of YBS is it's a mutual, it's a building society, and it provides mortgage and savings in the UK only. It's a UK only business. It's quite a big company. It's bigger than a lot of people realise. It's the 6th biggest lender of mortgages in the UK. There's 4,000 colleagues there. Yorkshire Building Society had been successful for 150 odd years, but in a very traditional way. Branches, contact centres when they emerged, and a little bit of online, but not much. It wasn't something they'd gone heavy on. And it kind of held an assumption that it didn't need to. Our demographic is not interested in digital. Some of those kind of old viewpoints. But we got a really forward-thinking CEO and leadership team that said, no, there's more we can do with this. We have a mutual which has social purpose. We could do something good. And around 2019, I got involved with the executive team in starting to design and plan out what a transformation of the business could look like. What problems are we solving for? What are we going after? It's interesting when I was talking to Will before I came up that you think that if you're a mutual, which means you're owned by your members, that would be your be all and end all. But actually, often being more commercial, delivering better results is what's best for the members. So it's an interesting dynamic that we had to figure out. But I'm really proud of it because we actually doubled the balance sheet, and that growth can be solely attributed to the transformation through bringing digital journeys, digital experiences, allowing people to access the society in their own time and their own way. What I'm really proud that we did actually is we maintained the branches as well. So we did a truly omni-channel experience. That's really rare, I think, in financial services. Often digital is so you can close your branches and drive your cost base down. So as a membership, a membership organisation, we kept the branches open because we knew there's a member need. There's 2 stats that I think show how well that went on a commercial level. So we were talking about in the decade preceding that business case, the balance sheet on savings was about 30 billion for Yorkshire Building Society.
Right. Wow.
And it had stayed at 30 billion for a decade, not grown. In fact, the digital part of the business shrunk in 2019, which might be the only business in the UK that shrunk digitally in 2019. When I left last year, the balance sheet on savings was 60 billion. We'd retained all of the branch assets, and everything that we'd grown was through the new stuff we built, digital.
Wow. Yeah, it's amazing.
So we created a whole new membership base. We increased Net Promoter Score by 20 points whilst doing that. So we didn't damage service through growing.
Yeah.
And again, I think that's quite unique.
I think that's incredible. Yeah.
There's a nice part of that which links to purpose. So profitability clearly increased massively. It's about 200% more profit.
Yeah.
But interestingly, again, as a mutual, we did this thing that we called member dividend. £500 million of profit that we generated through that new engine for growth went straight back into the savings book. We were the number one provider of interest in the UK for 3 years running.
That's amazing.
That is amazing.
So that's what the transformation engine drove. Right. So I am really proud of that.
Yeah.
And that's the thing, if you were interviewing me for a job, I'd tell you. But if I was to answer the question honestly, which is transformation I'm most proud of, and you're not going to be surprised I'm going to go back to people again,
No.
right, was when I joined that organisation in 2015, there's a lack of belief. There were people passionate about the business because it's a good business, but they never really believed that we could do change well. They didn't believe that we could compete with the big banks.
Yeah.
They didn't believe that people that worked at YBS had the skill set to do transformation.
Right.
They would bring SIs in and throw money at them. You can transform us.
They had imposter syndrome.
They had an organisational imposter syndrome. Yeah. When I left last year, it was a business that believed.
Yeah.
It had achieved that collectively. And it believed it could punch above its weight.
Yeah.
It believed it could do change. And you know what? Most of the people that went on that journey were there in 2015.
Yeah.
And that's what I'm most proud of. We created a belief and a mindset for growth. So it was my time to step off. I'd done my tenure.
Yeah.
I felt it was somebody else's turn to do transformation. But they inherited a business that believed.
Yeah.
And you can do a lot with belief.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. I think it's fundamental to outcome, right?
I agree.
I know there's a lot of talk about manifestations and things like that, right? I am not one of these people that sits and envisions, me receiving Oscar and things like that, partly because, I do nothing to get that. But I do believe that belief is a really core part of removing obstacles.
Yeah.
Fear is the opposite to belief, actually.
I like that.
Yeah.
I agree.
I don't think there's probably a better place to end, but I think that I sort of sat here for the last couple of minutes thinking about the folks who might listen to this, and we haven't spoken about technology.
That's what I was thinking. That's exactly.
And I don't know how long we've been going.
Yeah.
Right. But I own a technology recruitment business. By description, you would be a technologist.
Yeah.
You would be a technologist. This is broadly speaking aimed at technology people, or those who are certainly in the early stages of developing a career with it. We spoke previously around the sound bites that your peer group may look at, and hopefully yourself will use as a repository to overcome challenges in technology.
Yeah.
And I'd normally do the summing up, and I was trying to think of some clever way of linking in something to do with tech, and there'll be some bright people who can do that, but it's not in this episode, I can assure you of that. And I think that's brilliant. And I'll tell you why. I think the power of people is sometimes usually underplayed, possibly in society, but let's think about our tiny little podcast here. We're not going to take on that today. But the power of people in transformation and change and the world of work, it don't happen without them. And I can be a bit ad lib. We've had lots of people who said, what was on the horizon? AI, bots, and it's happening. And I'm not for a second saying, actually, some of this one particular case study this morning from Rich around tens of thousands of letters a day, releasing people to do what they're great at.
Absolutely.
That's there. But if you go back to what the technology is, freeing them up to do what they're great at. And it's exactly what you're talking. They did not join that business to go through letters and change phone numbers. They joined it to help people.
Yeah.
So letting them do that creates a much better environment. I would imagine by working with, around, and for you, the power of that, yes, technology is going to be the tool, but that's all it's going to be. It's going to be the tool for people to do better, different, change, innovate, deliver the dividend that you spoke about. That's fine, but it's not going to deliver it itself. Someone's going to help it do that, and we need to get the best out of them. And I think the probably the final thing is that level of vulnerability. The person who connected us thinks she was firstly bang on. And I'm sure that we will do this again, whether or not we've got mics. I don't really care. I love talking to you. But I think that openness and just ask me and it'll be okay. I'll tell you, it'll be okay. We'll get through it. Doesn't mean we're all going to get through it in the same places, in the same roles, in the same seats, but we are going to get through this and it'll be all right. I will definitely treat you with respect. I'll definitely listen to you. I'll definitely tell you where I'm coming from honestly. And I'll put it in an environment and a place where together we can work out what's best. Not sure there's a much better place to end than that, because I think it's pretty inspirational.
I think for me, what I would definitely, we talk about playbooks within change and transformation. What I think you really brought to us today is a spotlight on purpose-driven, people-oriented, faith, belief-backed chapter of that playbook. I think that is, I think it's absolutely critical to driving successful change with hopefully a bit of fun. So thank you.
Thank you. Enjoyed it.